What is up, everybody? Welcome back. So we just had the first presidential debate, and that means that the 2024 presidential election is just 4 months away. And the big question on everyone's mind, including myself, is who is going to win this thing? We are in kind of a unique statistical position here because we have the same exact two men from 4 years ago running against each other again. So a lot of these variables have actually been controlled for us. The two big things that a lot of folks believe is going to impact the results of this upcoming election are, one, the way that states voted in the last election, because if they voted a certain way last time, that may be indicative of how they're going to vote this time around, and also the current polling data. Now, either of these two things have issues with them alone. To name some issues with the way people voted in the last election, well, it's been 4 years since then. Opinions might have changed, the voters might feel differently, so that can't be a perfect indicator. And speaking about polling data, there's so many issues with polling data. Response bias, the people you survey in the first place, and the list can go on and on and on, where polling data is not a perfect indication of what's going to happen. But thinking about it, what if we take these two things together? What if we use as kind of this baseline the way people voted in the last election in each state, and then use the current polling data to somehow update that baseline? Now, if this language is starting to sound like Bayesian statistics, you're exactly on the right track. We're going to use a Bayesian methodology today, which is to start by taking our prior distribution of the way states voted in the last election. That's going to be our assumption, our prior without any evidence. And then we are going to update that prior with the latest polling data. Allow that polling data to say, you know what, that's how that state voted last time, but I have some evidence to say they're going to vote slightly differently, and I'm going to update that prior to become my posterior distribution about the way that each state is going to vote in this upcoming election. And once we have all of those posterior distributions for each state, we'll be able to simulate the way this election is going to go 4 months out, and we'll do another video 3 months out, 2 months out, 1 month out, and then just days before the election. So we'll see how this changes over time. So how is this methodology going to work? It's actually pretty simple. Because we're trying to model the probability that any given state is going to vote for Biden or Trump, that's a perfect place to use the beta distribution, which is exactly used to model these probabilities. We're going to start with a prior beta distribution of exactly the number of votes that both Biden and Trump got in the last election 4 years ago. And then we're going to take the latest survey data, the latest polling data from each state, and go ahead and allow that to update our prior distribution into a posterior beta distribution. And now here's the crucial part. We all may have different beliefs on how much we should believe polling data versus how much we should believe the results of the previous election. Hey folks, Ritvik from the edit here. So I've noticed going forward in the video, I use the phrase, how much should we believe the results of the previous election? What I really mean by that is how much do we believe the results of the previous election are going to impact or be similar to the results of this upcoming election. That's it, back to you, Pastor Ritvik. And this framework is going to allow us to just set whatever we want. It's going to allow us to set a dynamic weight, we'll call it gamma, for how much we trust the polling data. And the more we trust the polling data, for example, if gamma is 0.9, then we're going to take 1 minus that gamma, which in this case would be 0.1, and that's the amount that we're going to trust the results of the previous election. So everybody can have a different gamma here. I'll say right now, and I'll put it in the top of the screen because this will be important for a plot we'll look at in just a second. My personal gamma is 0.33. I believe in polling data at a 0.33 weight, which means I believe in the results of the last election at 1 minus that, which is 0.67. So about a 1/3, 2/3 split there. And now the method is pretty much done. For each of the states, we're going to go ahead and set our prior distribution based on the previous election. We're going to go ahead and let our evidence, which is going to be our polling data, update those prior distributions according to our personal weights gamma. So for some of us, there's going to be barely any updating at all. For others of us, it's going to update fully into whatever the polling data says at the current moment. And for others of us, it's going to be something halfway in between. We're going to have new alpha and beta parameters for our new beta distribution, our posterior beta distribution. And using those updated beta distributions, using those updated posteriors, for thousands of simulations, we're going to see who would win in each state and use those results to figure out how many electoral votes each candidate would get, and ultimately figure out which candidate would win the election. And when we put all of that aggregated information together, we get this one plot. Now this plot, folks, is really, really interesting because it tells a very interesting story based on your belief in the polling data in the first place. Case 1, we trust polling data very, very little, at a 15% level or less. Now, that means that we're going to key off a lot more of what happened in the last election because we put a lot more emphasis on the way states voted in the last election, which of course means that we would assume Biden would win this upcoming election. Case 2, we believe in polling data a moderate amount between 15 and 30%. And in this case, you can see in that middle purple zone, it's kind of indeterminate. They get an equal number of electoral votes, or there's not enough statistical significance in all these thousands of simulations we did in order to conclusively say who would win the presidency. And finally, case 3, which takes up the majority of the amount of this plot, which is if we trust polling data at more than a 30% level, we would assume that Trump is going to win. Although the margin of that win is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger the more we trust that polling data. And now we grab that number that's been sitting in the top of the screen. My personal belief in polling data is 0.33. So we go ahead and just look at where that is on the x-axis, and that is how we get my prediction, this data scientist's prediction 4 months before the election, about what's going to happen. I'm going to predict right now that Biden is going to get 253 electoral votes and Trump is going to get 285 electoral votes, making Donald Trump the winner of this upcoming presidential election. Now, of course, caveats here, it's 4 months out, the polling data is going to change, and like I said, we'll check in and do this methodology again a month later, and then a month after that, and so on, and this whole plot could change, so it'll be interesting to see how it changes over time. There's also other extensions we should do on this analysis to make it more correct. I'll just name 2 off the top of my head. One is, of course, there's third-party candidates running, and we know historically third-party candidates usually don't win the presidency, but they can draw votes away from other candidates, and that can influence the election in a very significant way. And we haven't captured that here. We've assumed here that everybody just has 2 options, and they're just going to vote for either Biden or they're going to vote for Trump, which is true to some extent, but not true enough that we shouldn't even consider it in a future analysis. And the other thing I would say off the top of my head is that there's other factors too that can impact what the outcome of the election is going to be. We've just kind of pretended like the world has 2 factors, which is the way you voted in the last election and what the polling data says. But there's countless other factors we could consider as well. For example, how the state voted in the midterm elections, because although they weren't voting for Donald Trump and Joe Biden then, they were still voting on some political party lines, and so that may be important information to pull in. So definitely a lot of things we can extend on this analysis, but I think this is a good baseline because it lets us set a mathematical, a statistical, a Bayesian framework for how we might update what happened in the last election with evidence, and most importantly, put our own personal weights on what we believe the credibility of this evidence to be. There's no right or wrong answer on this x-axis we were showing about how much you should trust polls. It's perfectly acceptable to not trust them at all. It's also perfectly acceptable to trust them blindly, fully, and it's perfectly acceptable to be anywhere in between. But it is interesting to see how your personal belief is going to impact what universe you think you'll be living in 4 months from now, who you think would win the presidency. So if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more videos just like this. Any comments are always welcome in the section below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see all you wonderful, wonderful people next time.